Welcome to the Wild Tales podcast. I'm Jason Fox, and this series is all about adventure, resilience, and inspirational humans. The podcast is presented by the Book of Man and is supported by Talisker Single Malt Whisky. My guest today is Mark Ormrod. Mark's a former Royal Marine Commando who was badly injured by an IED in Afghanistan and became a triple amputee as a result. But since then, he has become an author, a motivational speaker, peak performance coach, a charity fundraiser, an all-round hero basically. Now obviously we're still in lockdown, so this episode was recorded remotely, so forgive any little glitches. But I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Once again, we're also going to be answering some questions that you've asked me on Instagram. I'm going to be sending a bottle of my favourite Talisker to the top question I pick out. Here we go. Mark, welcome. I mean, it's amazing to have you on. The man, the myth, the utter legend. We've known each other for a few years now, and predominantly we only ever catch up at social gatherings and like schmoozing events, which are now pretty much fallen off the radar. Mate, thanks for coming on.
Oh, mate, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. Obviously, we're recording this in the midst of a lockdown. We're probably, what are we now, 7 weeks in?
I think I'm about 9 because I had a slight injury before lockdown, so I was housebound a little bit before the official statement. So it's all gone to a bit of a blur, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, mate, how have you been? How have you found it so far?
Honestly, not that bad. You know, it's just the hardest thing for me through this whole lockdown. I've got 2 of my 3 kids at home with me now, the 6 and the 8-year-old, trying to homeschool them. You know, and every day is a battle at the minute, you know, 6-7 weeks into doing it, just trying to get them to sit still and concentrate and teach them. But it hasn't been that bad, if I'm honest. No,
I mean, I think there's certain things from our background that go in favour of us in these sort of situations. However, a few people I've spoken to said probably the hardest thing is that homeschooling, because essentially parents aren't taught to be teachers.
Right.
And I think it's difficult that's why kids go to school, because they go into an environment where they know what they need to do. They need to switch on and learn. Whereas at home, it's a place normally where they run around and cause their parents immeasurable grief.
Yeah, and there's so many distractions, mate. You know, we've got an Xbox here. The boys got a little Nintendo. They've got the internet. You know, and it's just I feel for them. You know, because it is hard for them to sit there when they know they got the cartoons on the telly in the front room and trying to do, you know, their times tables and spellings. It must be pretty difficult. So that's probably the hardest thing so far. Yeah, I would agree. Although I'm lucky with regard to all that sort of stuff. But mate, mentally, where are you at during lockdown? I'm all right, mate. You know, I'm keeping myself busy. I've been furloughed from work until the end of May. My wife's still working, so we're still doing the homeschooling. I'm trying to help her with that. I'm reading, you know, just trying to stay physically and mentally active. You know, not just get into a rut or a slump. And I think that's the danger. I think it's quite dangerous if you get into a rut or a slump. Then mentally, things can take a bit of a turn. So I've been proactive with it, and I'm just trying to keep on top of it constantly. Yeah. I spoke to Ollie on the one before you, and again, it was about having that sort of the routine and having the discipline to stick to at least some form of routine, no matter how loose. That's been the biggest thing for me is routine. You know, I still get up at 5:30 in the morning, like I would do regularly, to start my day off, and I start it off in a specific way. Which gets me primed and set up for the day, which then means I can jump into that homeschooling at 8:30, full of energy, ready to go, you know, knock that out of the park. We've got a cut-off time for that, usually about lunchtime. Then we have the afternoon routine with a bit of fizz, bit of downtime, bit of family time. So, yeah, that's 100% been the key for me is being disciplined in that routine and sticking to it. Yeah. I'd agree.
good, 100%. But mate, so I had a bit of I didn't know how to start this off properly, because part of me wanted to introduce you and give a rundown of your bio, because there's definitely people out there that will obviously know you, but I'm thinking that there might be some people who don't know much about you. So what I'm going to do is actually take them on a journey. So instead of introducing you as to what you've been doing recently and all this sort of stuff, we're going to start from the beginning. And then I want me and you to take the listener on a journey of your life. So essentially, talk to me about growing up in Plymouth.
In the Muff, down in Plymouth.
In the Muff. Just quickly, before you do go on, I was born in Freedom Fields Hospital. So essentially, I am sort of a Janner.
I know, we had this conversation, didn't we?
We did have this conversation, yeah, but there's still a lot of people that think I was born in Luton, which I wasn't. No,
I was born in Freedom Fields as well, mate.
Same I know, hospital. And I think they once a couple of legends were spooned out of there, they just shut it down because it no longer exists, does it?
No, it's a fire station now.
You set the place on fire. That's what happened.
I'm still here, still down in Plymouth, 36 years later.
Yeah.
You know, I just love the place. I've had plenty of chance to move away, but always just decided to stay down here.
So what was it like growing up?
Oh, it was good, mate. You know, I haven't got one of these stories where I had a terrible upbringing. You know, I had everything I could have possibly asked for when I was growing up. I grew up, it's quite funny, I grew up right next to, in a place called Pennington-Quick, right by the city centre. Yeah. And all the lads and the girls that I grew up with and lived around my area, they were all about 2 or 3 years older than I was. So when I went to school, I was the young guy, the sprog. So I think that helped me when I was growing up to grow up a little bit quicker than I perhaps should have for my age, because I was always around those guys that were, you know, when they were 16 and I was 13, they were allowed to go out and do certain things. When they were 18, go into nightclubs, you know, you'd be able to sneak along with them and join those crowds. So, you know, I had everything I wanted.
Just nightclubs such as Jesters.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. That's still going strong as well. They haven't managed to knock that down yet.
Have they? So basically, just a little bit of background. I'll interject quickly. Plymouth, if you've not been, there is a road called Union Street, and it used to be absolutely toppers, rammed, full up with nightclubs, pubs, and it was the social hub of Plymouth. It's probably got a really bad reputation. Jesters was one of the nightclubs, and I mean, I've frequented it a lot in the past, and I know, without even talking to Mark about it, that he has, especially if he grew up there. So anyway, that's my explanation. Back to you, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, you know, just a young lad, mate, who grew up, you know, was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, running around, you know, grazing my knee, falling off the walls, getting in mischief and trouble, getting brought home by the police for being cheeky and that kind of stuff. A lot of energy. You know, before way before smartphones and all these devices came out, when you're actually out in the street and you didn't go home until the street lights came on. You know, so I had a great childhood, mate. Can't really complain. So,
I mean, that does sound not dissimilar to mine. You know, it's nostalgic, isn't it, when we talk about us old folk talk about used to play out in the streets, you know, grazing every bit of the body, not going home until the dark hours. Your mum not really worried too much about you, or she'd be shouting you in for your dinner. Seems like it's a thing of the past to a certain degree, but that's what it is. Mate, at what stage did you start to become interested in the military?
I'll tell you what it was. I was about 15 and a half. Now, just go back to what I was saying about all my friends were older than me. A lot of them had left school when I was approaching my GCSEs. And a couple of them were already in the army, some based over in Germany in tank regiments. Some they were based all over the world, Canada, the UK. Yeah. And I got to about 15 and a half with my GCSEs on the horizon. And I was just walking through school one day and I thought to myself, when these exams are over, I'm either going to have to go on to further education or I need to find a job. Well, not a job. I knew I wanted a career, not a job. And so I went home and just started giving it some serious thought. I thought, well, you know, what do I want? Do I want to do education or do I want to go out into the big bad world? Now, eventually, I decided that I wanted to go out into the big bad world while I was young, start a career from the bottom, try and work my way up and make something of my life. And so I started thinking about what it was that I wanted to do. Now, Plymouth, as you know, mate, is a big military city. There's a huge naval presence, Royal Marines presence, army presence in the city. And because I had those friends who were already out there in the military, it kind of swayed my decision. I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to finish these exams, do as well as I can, and I'm going to join the army. Because bizarrely, even though I lived in Plymouth and was brought up here, I didn't know who the Royal Marines were. I'd never come into contact with them.
Wow.
So I went down to the careers centre one day and I sat through the briefing video with the army recruiter, went back home, took the paperwork back, took my parents to sign it because I was too young to do it at that point. And then my dad said to me, do you know you've got an uncle who was a captain in the Royal Marines? And I'm like, no. So fortunately, he only lived about 20 minutes up the A38 in a place called Buckfastleigh. So we arranged to go up and see him. And I sat down with him. As soon as I walked in his house, he lived in like a farmhouse barn conversion type thing. He had horses and everything. And I walked through the front door and he had this big citation with an officer's sword with his green beret hanging off the end of it. And he sat me down and he started talking to me about life in the Royal Marines. He had gone from Marine to captain in 22 years. He told me a little bit about his career. He told me why the Royal Marines were going to be different to the Army. And so I went back to the recruiting centre on Monday morning and I spoke to the Royal Marine recruiter who put in the old VHS cassette for me. And I just sat there with my jaw open like, what's going on? These guys are jumping out of planes. They're on speedboats. They've got these big packs on their back. They're in the jungle, the desert, the Arctic, the woodland. And I was like, this is incredible. I want to do this. So that was pretty much it. From that point, my mind was made up. I went back and I started the process, finished up school, and then just waited for the phone call to get started.
That's it. That's awesome. I love the way that your old man just springs it on you at the last minute. Oh, by the way, you've got an uncle who's in the Corps.
Yeah.
Let's go and have a chat with him. Yeah.
That changed the game.
Yeah, I know the video. It was, I mean, everything that you said about that video sounds awesome, except they're wearing heavy packs on their backs.
Yeah.
When you haven't done it, it looks great. And then when you start to do, you're like, oh my God, this is shit.
100%, mate. 100%.
Anyway, mate, what you obviously, you did Royal Marines training, which everyone knows it's hard. We speak about it all the time. It is actually an experience that afterwards you enjoy. But what was it that you enjoyed about being a soldier? Let's not focus on the training bit. I want to focus on what is it that you loved about the Corps, actually? What is it that you loved about being a Royal Marine?
First of all, I think it's that feeling of being part of a very small, unique, and elite organization. I don't need to speak to you about that, mate. And the attrition rate in the Royal Marines and the dropout rate is massive. So to get through that training, to be part of that club, if you like, was phenomenal. I just used to carry myself around with such pride everywhere I went. You go into a bank and you fill out an application and they say, what's your occupation? And you grow like 3 feet and you say Royal Marines, because people know who the Royal Marines are. And it just made me feel really, really proud. But I also really enjoyed the personal growth aspect of it, of doing these things which aren't always comfortable, for having to push yourself, to force yourself to grow, having these great people around you that encourage you to do that and help you to do that. And, just the ability and the opportunities throughout your entire career to grow as an individual and become a better person. I don't think there's anywhere else in the world that you can get a better opportunity to do that.
No, go on, mate. Sorry.
that's what I loved about it, mate, is being part of that club and just being able to develop yourself as an individual.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And actually, that's the first time we've had someone talk about it like that, because we've gone off on different tangents before. But mate, you joined the Corps. It is an organisation, the Corps being the Royal Marines Commandos. But you joined when it probably was just about to go into the most operationally, its tempo of operations just skyrocketed through the roof. Iraq had started and Afghanistan, and the Corps really were thrown in at the deep end. Not the deep end, but they were thrown in at it and sort of like took the bull by the horns, I suppose, when it came to being asked to do a job. Now, Afghanistan, it was high tempo operations, really kinetic. I don't think anyone could ever know that more than you. Are you able to talk to us about your injury and the story of that?
Yeah, for sure, mate. No problem. So yeah, I mean, what you're saying is bang on. I passed out in October 2001 with 804 Troop. 4 weeks after we watched 9/11 on the news, so we kind of knew straight away that we were going to pass out, and then we were going to get straight in at the thick end. I got trained for Objecana early 2002, but never ended up going. Did Telic 1 in Iraq in March 2003.
Yeah.
And then I didn't deploy again until Afghanistan in 2007. I actually just rejoined the Corps after a slight period outside as a failed civvy. And I came back in and I joined 40 Commando, who were next on the rotation to go out to Afghan on Op Herrick 7, and deployed out there on September 7th, 2007.
Yeah.
After a couple of days in Bastion, acclimatizing, getting our kit ready and doing all that good stuff, I flew out to a place called Forward Operating Base Robinson in Helmand, which I'm sure you know of.
It's got a tasty reputation, that place, for anyone that has never heard of it. It's basically a small, dusty building or group of buildings in the middle of a very arid countryside.
Yeah, so it literally, after 3 or 4 days in Bastion, got flown out to Fob Rob, and then literally just went straight into the routine. The advanced party were there. They'd set up sangers, sentry routine. There were American Special Forces and Dutch Marines and everyone in that Fob with us. And we just set straight into a routine, straight out on patrols, conducting missions and doing all that kind of stuff. No kind of warm-up period to it, just straight into it. And it was great, mate. We had a very successful first half of the tour. Never sustained any injuries or any fatalities on any of the patrols that we went on, any of the contacts that we got into. And we had a couple.
Yeah.
But then on Christmas Eve, 2007, after 2 or 3 days of relative inactivity, we were tasked with going on another foot patrol, literally just to get boots out on the ground, because we were losing a little bit of momentum. Obviously, we're always being observed by the enemy, so we had to show them, even if we weren't doing anything, that we were still going out there. We were still dominating the ground and taking the fight to them if they wanted it. Yeah. So we just got given this patrol to go on, where the idea was we would leave the rear entrance of the camp in 2 sections. One would go north, one would go south. We were then told to patrol the immediate perimeter of the camp, so pushing no more than 300 meters out. Then meet at the front entrance, so now the opposite side. Close things down, secure the location, and finish up for the day. So easy as that. Very, very basic, low-level stuff. We had no intelligence that told us there was any cause for concern. It was just literally, lads, go out the back, walk around for a couple of hours, come in the front, show the enemy that you're out there still doing stuff, come back in, we'll take a few days off for Christmas.
A little bit of show of force before the Christmas break.
Pretty much, yeah. Just to kind of pre-warn them, say, look, we're still here, we're still operating. So if you do attack, we're not resting doing nothing. So the time came. we left the rear entrance of the camp. I was second in command of the guys that went north. The other guys went south. We went out and patrolled. We did all the, the usual things, the SOPs, intelligence gathering, engaging with the locals, reporting anything suspicious back up the chain, all that kind of stuff. And then probably about 4 or 5 hours later, we found ourselves then at the opposite end of the camp, ready to finish up and come back in. Now, the section that I was in, we were on a piece of high ground, probably the highest piece of ground for about a 2-mile radius, called the North Fort, one of our target indicators. Mm-hmm. Slightly beneath us, we could see Forward Operating Base Robinson. And then farther beneath that was the other section that we left with earlier in the day. So obviously, being in a tactically advantageous position, we were tasked with giving them overwatch so they could safely get back into camp. They get behind the perimeter wall, return the favor. Everyone goes back in.
Yeah.
So we're up on the high feature. Corporal Sean Helsby, the guy in charge, took his half of the section and started giving them fire positions. I took the other half of the section, and about 4 meters in front of me was what I'll describe as a shallow bowl in the ground. Now, obviously, and all the military guys listening will know that when you go farm, you'll take cover behind a building or a tree or something like that. But we didn't have those options where we were. So in my mind, I thought if we get in this little bowl, we get down on our stomachs, we're up high anyway. It's going to be very difficult to see us, very, very difficult to attack us. This is going to give us the best form of protection.
Yeah.
So I jumped in. The lads all started taking up their fire positions. I stood back. I observed for a little bit, did some checks. When they were happy, they gave me the thumbs up. Did a few more last-minute checks just to make sure that we were tight and well defended. And then I started walking over towards the position that I selected for myself.
Yeah.
Now, when I got there, I went to get down to my stomach, and as my right knee hit the floor, that was the moment that I knelt on and detonated an improvised explosive device.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember it. If you want me to go into detail about what happened next.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can. Just to quickly clarify a few points there for people listening. A contact is when you actually have a gunfight, a firefight with the enemy, and an IED, improvised explosive device, is obviously some form of explosive device that is laid out by the enemy, sometime in the past. So, yeah, if you can then pick up from there and just sort of like explain how you remember that as long as you're happy to. Yeah,
of course. So you've got to imagine, well, you don't, but some of the listeners do, what the terrain is like in Afghanistan. So it's very sandy, it's very dusty. So when this device exploded, instantly there was this huge dust cloud created. So temporarily, I couldn't see anything and I was blinded. My gut instinct was that we had been attacked. I thought someone had fired a mortar bomb or an RPG on our position that had exploded nearby, created a dust cloud, and that's why I couldn't see. And all this chaos and confusion was going on. My adrenaline was spiked. And so I thought, okay, when the dust cloud settles, ID where the enemy is, start getting the rounds down, and hopefully we can tactically withdraw to a better position, and then, we'll make some calls on the ground there, whether we're going to retreat or attack or do whatever. So I knew, even amidst all the chaos and confusion, that behind me, beneath me, about 600 meters to the rear, was a small wooden forestry block, a small copse of trees. Everything else around that area was just flat mud fields. So with a million thoughts racing around in my head, I thought, if someone's going to attack us, that's where they're going to do it from, because they got cover from view. So in my mind, I started saying to myself, turn around, turn around, turn around. ID the enemy, start shooting, everyone else will start shooting, and we can hopefully get out and no one's going to be hurt. After about 4 times in my mind saying turn around, turn around, turn around, I realized that although my brain was telling my body to do something, that my body wasn't responding, and I couldn't figure out why. So I did the only thing I could in that situation, and I waited. I thought, I'll wait till this dust cloud settles. I'll be able to see what's happening. I'll assess the situation. make some quick calls there, and then figure out what we're doing. Now, all this, it happens so quickly, and there's a million things going through your mind, but you just make some very, very quick decisions, and you process it very, very quickly. Yeah. So I waited, and the dust cloud got to probably chest level, and I started looking around, panicking, hoping that none of my friends had been hurt, but I couldn't see any of them. And then the dust cloud eventually got probably 6 inches from the ground, hit the ground, and disappeared. And as it did, I looked down to where my legs should have been, and they had both been completely ripped off from the knee down.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know anyone listening to this, if you've ever been in a traumatic incident, like a car crash or maybe a fall from a height, you'll understand what I'm saying here. But it's a very surreal experience. It's almost like everything outside of you slows down and feels like you're dreaming, like it's not real. But everything inside goes at 1,000 miles an hour. And I just sat there in no pain, just it was a very uncomfortable feeling, like an intense pins and needles feeling in my legs, but no pain. I just sat there looking in disbelief at what I was seeing. My brain was really struggling to process it. And I think even more so because there was no pain. But for some reason, I very quickly snapped out of it because I remembered my team and started looking around again. And this time, as I looked over my right shoulder, I saw Corporal Sean Helsby, the guy that was in charge. And me and Sean went through training together back in 2001. Yeah. So I knew him very well. And, just looking at his face, he was clearly in shock, all the colour draining out his face. And I kind of looked at him and thought, in a kind of confused state, like, what's happening? What am I looking at? Why does he look like that? And I went to look back to my legs to try and make sense of what was actually happening. Mm. And then as I kind of swept the floor and got to the 3 o'clock position, I saw my arm kind of like lying there in the sand, still attached by a bit of flesh on my bicep, but all the bone had been shattered. That there was nothing salvageable at all from my arm or my legs. And that was kind of the moment when I realized what was actually happening and what I was going to have to do if I wanted to survive this. Now, I cannot praise those lads enough about what they did in that situation. Every single one of them, rather than get emotional and want to run in and try and help me like we were trained not to do, they all just switched on to do their individual tasks that had been pre-assigned before the patrol. So immediately one of the lads is on the radio, another lad's on his belt buckle, prodding a safe route to me when the medic gets there, another lad's setting up an all-round defence, making sure there's no risk of a small arms follow-up and everything. And they did it so professionally and quickly that by the time the medic got to me, he literally ran straight in, gave me some morphine because it was starting to hurt by that point. Yeah. And then he started applying tourniquets to both my legs. Now, he asked me to help apply a tourniquet to my arm. I found out since it's one of the things that medics do to keep you responsive and stop you just giving up. So I tried to appease him by doing this tourniquet on my arm. And then he got me where he deemed me stable to pull me out of this minefield, pulled out this stretcher, hooked his hands under my armpits, and went to drag me onto the stretcher. Now, like I said just now, I hadn't at that point really been any pain. But when he pulled me onto the stretcher, I just felt like a horrible stabbing feeling coming out of my right thigh, almost like if you put a screwdriver into someone's kneecap and just ratcheted down on it. Yeah, yeah. And so I looked down to where this pain was coming from, and coming out of my thigh was like if you imagine a thin piece of rope covered in blood and claret and sand and dust, just kind of like snaking in the sand. So I followed it, and it went into a boot. And I don't know why, but I picked the boot up and I looked inside it, and my foot was still in there. So the medic had to put my foot on my stomach, put me on the stretcher, take me down off this high feature, throw me in the back of a vehicle, that was waiting, and then evacuate me to get me to the HLS, where a helicopter was going to come in, come and pick me up. Now, I found out in the years since this, something I found out only just recently, was on the way back when the Sergeant Major was driving, there were a couple of guys in a truck that tried blocking the road to stop me getting back to the FOB to get evacuated. They put a big Afghan truck across the road. They refused to move. And so they, did some very skillful driving, got around that, started climbing up this incline to then go back into the camp. And as we got to a certain point, me and the medic fell out the back of the vehicle. And fortunately for me, the Sergeant Major who was evacuating me, who was driving the vehicle, turned around, put his arm out and grabbed for whatever he could grab to hold me in the vehicle and stop me falling out. And he ended up grabbing my femur, the femur bone coming out of my right thigh.
Yeah.
Now, he left the medic, because that other section we left with earlier in the day, they were at the bottom of this incline, so he was safe, the medic. But he made the decision to leave him, get me to the HLS, and the last thing I can remember is the helicopter landing, the sandstorm that's created from the propeller blades, and then the heat that comes out of the exhaust kind of pounding down on me. And I passed out, which is when I later found out that I was declared clinically dead.
So you were when you passed out, obviously everyone was probably looking at the state you were in and going, well, he's obviously going to die, or he's probably on his way out now.
Yeah, they so there was another guy injured in the blast. He got shrapnel wounds in his back and in his arm. And when they put us on the back of the Chinook, they felt me for a pulse and they said I didn't have one. They tried to put intravenous lines into me, but all my veins had collapsed because of the massive blood loss. And then when they put an oxygen mask on me, where it should have steamed up to show that I was breathing, it didn't. So they said, this guy's done. We need to go work on this other guy because we don't want two dead bodies in the back of our helicopter. Now, luckily, one of the medics walked past me to get some equipment to go back and work on Stu, the other guy. And as he did that, he said that my eyes started to flutter, which to them meant that my heart was still beating.
Yeah.
So he alerted the other medics. They came over, got to work on me. And 3 days prior to this incident, whoever makes the decisions in the Army medical world had cleared the use of a new technique where if you couldn't get intravenous lines for somebody's veins, you took a drill and you drilled into their tibia and their fibia and you put intravenous lines in that way. Problem being, both of my legs had just been ripped off by an IED, so I didn't have a tib or a fib. So these medics very bravely just made the decision to try and drill into my hip bone. The first attempt failed. They told me they didn't pull the skin tight enough, so they couldn't get the line to bite. But the second time, they pulled the skin tight, put the line in, and they said within about 3 minutes, I was awake and I was responsive. And I think my first comment was, I don't remember any of this, but I said that my ass was hurting, which is apparently a side effect of mass amounts of morphine. So yeah, they brought me back from the dead and got me back to Bastion. And then the surgeons did an initial operation just to tidy up all the mess, amputated both my legs above the knee, right one above the elbow, and flew me back home.
Mate, that is an unbelievably humbling, sobering, and don't take this the wrong way, amazing story, because I'll tell you for one reason why, and that's because of your ability to tell it in such an amazing way. Secondly, because I've spoken to a lot of people, I've been with people, and when you try and talk to them about, the physical impact of war on themselves, a lot of people cannot really remember what happens. Like you went into that phase, obviously, when you get to the helicopter, that's it. It's all, or even actually before then, because you don't remember falling out or nearly falling out of the vehicle. So, but to be able to recite that and explain it like you did, that was awesome, mate. 100% awesome. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that have played a great part in making sure a good person's still around. But yeah, mate, just to move on a little bit, but still staying on the same sort of subject, you obviously came back to the UK. There was an awful lot for you to get done. How did you get your head round what happened?
Do you know what it is, mate? I think a lot of it is pot luck, because I think when you wake up, you know, and you're in a hospital and you gradually get weaned off the pain relief and medication, you come into the real world and you understand what's happened. You're only going to go one or two ways. I think you're going to look at it matter of fact and say, okay, this has happened. There's nothing I can do about it. I've got to get on with it. Or you're going to say, why did this happen to me? This isn't fair. I hate the world, and go the other way. And I think it was a combination of two things. You know, I think the medical team in the hospital did an unbelievably good job of taking me off that medication in a way where over the course of a week, I could understand and accept what had happened in a manageable way, rather than just get hit in one giant go, like, this is what's happened, mate, you've got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I was just lucky in the fact that I looked at it and said, you know, there's nothing I can do about this. They're not going to grow back. I've just got to move on as quickly as I can and regain my independence and get my life back. And that was just the attitude that I had. And then when you couple that with the massive support that I had from the Royal Marines and from friends and family and medical staff, you know, it just all of that combined was the winning formula, which enabled me to not dwell on the negative side of my situation for too long.
Yeah. So that pretty much wraps up, you know, your mental health side. Obviously you've probably, you know, we all do, but no doubt you've had times when you've probably felt pretty shit. I know, you know, we've had chats about that, and it's an obvious sort of like byproduct of what's happened. But can you remember any times when it's got, you know, you've got to the point where you've had to consciously be like, right, Mark, you've got to, you know, you've got to get a grip here?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if I could talk about this, because I think it's quite important, to be honest. You can very easily make it sound like I woke up, thought, okay, let's do this, and then, you know, the rest is the happy story. But, you know, we both know that's not the case. So about 3.5 weeks into it, I get a knock on my hospital room door. Guy walks in, introduces himself to me as the country's leading professional in the field of amputations. So at the very beginning of 2008, this guy had been amputating people's limbs for over 30 years. And he came in my room and he told me pretty non-emotionally, you know, a matter of fact, that I was never going to walk again, because he'd never met anybody who had just one leg missing above the knee that had any success with prosthetics, because they were too painful, it was too difficult, and it took too much energy. So most people just gave up and spent their life in a wheelchair. You know, and I'm 24 years old at this point, and I'm 3.5 weeks into my recovery, trying to be positive, and then this expert tells me I'm never going to walk again, and I might as well just give it up. So that was, for me, the first time when I really had to look inside myself and try and figure things out. And then that was rough. You know, that was hard for me to deal with. And then maybe 2 weeks after that, the first time I was actually out of the hospital, I got in a wheelchair, and Becky, my wife, and my family were all staying in a welfare flat across the road. So we went over to the welfare flat. It was like a tower block. And I got in through the communal door, no problems at all. Got in through the front entrance of the flat, fine. And then I went to get into the front room, but because I've only got one arm, the wheels on the wheelchair on one side are wider, because you have to use one hand to do everything. Yeah. So I couldn't fit my wheelchair through the front room. So when everyone is, you know, eating their food and watching telly and everything like that, I was sat out in the corridor, you know, eating mine in a wheelchair. I had to pee in a milk bottle because I couldn't fit in the toilet. You know, I just felt completely isolated and out on a limb, if you like. Yeah. And that night, we were allowed to stay in that flat, and we figured it out. My dad, I think, picked me up out the wheelchair. We put the wheelchair in the bedroom, and he then put me back in the wheelchair. So I'd managed to get through that doorway. And although in hospital, I had obviously been shaving and brushing my teeth, and I'd seen my face from the neck up in a mirror, I'd never seen myself in a full-length mirror to this point. And there was a full-length mirror in the bedroom. Now, prior to being injured, I was 6'2", and at my peak, about 16 stone. And I rode past this mirror, 3.5 feet tall, probably about 9 stone 2 at that point, you know, just looking like a skeleton with a bit of flesh on. And I just looked at myself, And I honestly, I've got no shame in admitting this. I spent the entire night crying with Becky in bed saying, I can't do this. You know, look at me. I'm 24. I've gone from the peak of physical fitness in this career as an elite soldier to someone now who's going to spend the rest of their life in a wheelchair, getting cared for, fed, driven about, looking horrendous, you know, and I don't want to do it. I just spent the entire night crying with Becky comforting me.
Mate, that's powerful stuff. Really appreciate you talking about it. And I think it is something that's really important to talk about, the mental health side of, you know, something as horrific as that. But mate, just quickly, can you summarize for the people that are listening what bits are missing in that? So as in, like, what do we call it? You know, what are your injuries?
Physical or mental?
Physical.
Both legs above the knee, amputated, and right arm above the elbow.
Right, there we go. Triple amputee.
Yeah.
All amputations above the joint that makes a difference, basically.
Yeah, massively.
Mate, that's powerful up until then, but it becomes even more powerful, your story, because when did it start to change, and when did your life start to change from being wheelchair bound? Because obviously we're going to start talking very shortly about your training, sport, and everything else that goes with that.
Yeah, I mean, those 2 times I just described, they are probably the only 2 down times I really had. And I think after having a good clear out and a cry about it all, that helped to put me on the path to just focus on the positive stuff. And so I started setting myself goals and targets to kind of move towards. Now, the first thing I did was I set a goal when I got to rehab after 6 weeks in hospital of walking at the Meadows Parade when the unit got back from Afghan, because they were still, when I got injured, they still had half a tour to do. Then they would have like 10 weeks leave after that, come back to the unit, do the Meadows Parade. So I started setting myself goals to walk at that Meadows Parade to keep me focused on the positive and give me something to get out of bed for every morning and something to strive for. And that set like a chain of events in motion, I guess, where it was just really powerful for me, and it helped me to keep my head right and to focus on the good and the challenge and the positive stuff in my life. And you know, it's pretty much from the early days, that's what I've done, and that's how I've been able to stay on top, I think, physically and mentally, is just by setting goals and then doing whatever it takes to achieve them.
So obviously you were told you weren't going to be able to ever walk again by an expert, a man that was in that field for over 30 years. But obviously it wasn't true. You know, you wanted to defy what the experts were telling you. So let's move on to your legs. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, you know, the prosthetics and what that journey was like, and how obviously they've changed your life from where you were, you know, post the incident. But let's talk about the build up, because I'm trying to get to the competitive side of Mark Ormrod.
Okay. So I think that's gonna pick up now, I think, then, because the first day I was issued my prosthetic legs, I was wheeled down to rehab and pushed in between a set of parallel bars, and they talked me through how these legs were going to work and what it was I needed to do. So I got myself ready to fit them to my residual limbs, and all the physios were like, stop, you've got to go in this crane. And I'm like, what are you talking about, a crane? And so you've got to put these straps on, it's like a rock climbing harness, and then we'll winch you up, and then we'll drop you down into the legs slowly, and then you can walk up and down with this crane hanging from the ceiling. And I was like, I don't want a crane, just let me crack on. But, you know, health and safety being what it is, they ended up putting me in this crane. But luckily, I guess I put on a bit of weight by this point, because I burnt the motor out and it couldn't pick me up. It just burnt out, started smoking. So, right. So I was like, well, we've got no choice now, just let me have a go. So eventually, after about 45 minutes, I got stood upright. And I had to steady myself because there's a whole thing with blood pressure being lying down for so long and not being vertical.
Yeah.
And I looked to the end of these parallel bars, about 5 meters. And I was like, right, let's just do this. Let's eat up this 5 meters, turn around, come back, and then we've got a foundation. So I walked up and I walked down, and I swear to God, mate, I felt like I did after the 30 miler. I was in pieces. And I went back to my room and I fell asleep. I had a power nap in the afternoon, and I woke up and I thought this is going to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I thought I could just get by on brute force and ignorance, and that because I was young and fit, I'd be fine. But I was totally wrong. And that's where I think the fire got lit for me to just really, you've got to figure this out, but you've got to be smart as well as physically able. So I got online, and because I was the UK's first triple amputee, there was nobody here at home who I could call up and say, I'm struggling with this. How do I do this? Can you help me with that? Because anyone who had gone before me who was a triple amputee that I had met were not using prosthetics. There was no one in the military that could mentor me. So I found a guy in America who, when he was 15, got hit by a train. And what the stuff he was doing was unreal. Like at that point, I couldn't survive half a day in my prosthetics without needing a wheelchair. I'm changing my shirt 4 times a day because of sweat. And this guy's out there walking around, driving cars, going swimming in the ocean, surfing, doing triathlons. So I used to watch his content on YouTube and the social media as a bit of motivation. Now, the short version of the story is, I reached out to him and I thought, if this guy can achieve this and we've got very similar levels of injuries, then there's no reason that I can't achieve the same that he's achieved if I ask him how he did it mentally and physically. What mental and physical steps did you take to get to where you are now? Now, at that point, he had been a triple amputee for 6 years and I'd been one for about 6 weeks. So I thought I can distill 6 years of his successes and failures, his wins and his losses, into a much shorter amount of time, just by asking him what he did and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Fortunately, him and his team agreed to help me, and I started making some quite significant progress. And then eventually, in June 2009, I flew out to meet him. I met Cameron and the team, and they just took me on this 3-week intensive boot camp where they just whipped my ass non-stop, day in, day out. They wouldn't let me bring a wheelchair with me. They wouldn't let me bring a carer with me. They just made me fly to the other side of the world, to Oklahoma. And they said, look, come out here, we'll train you, but these are our conditions. And I went out there, and 9th of June 2009 was the last time I ever used a wheelchair because of what these guys had helped me to do. They showed me what was possible. And I knew that with a bit of competitive spirit, I could achieve the same as what he did. And thanks to them, I was able to.
Mate, that's, again, another chapter in this podcast of awesomeness. And just amazing. But what I'm going to do now is move on to the Invictus Games. You've done a few now. You've competed in quite a few things. Talk to me about the Invictus Games, mate.
So one of the things that I've noticed about being disabled is that when you first become disabled, if you're not born that way, everyone says to you, when you're doing the Paralympics, mate, what sport are you going to do? Right? And I'm like, I don't want to do the Paralympics. I've got no interest in it. None of the sports in the Paralympics appeal to me. And I'm not going to just do sport for the sake of it because I'm now disabled. I had different goals in the beginning. Leaving my wheelchair behind was my main goal. And a lot of other guys got into sport and it helped them, but I just had no interest. Now, every Christmas, I sit down and I start mapping out my goals for the following year. And in 2016, I realized that Christmas 2017 was going to be my 10-year anniversary. So I wanted to do something that I hadn't done before. And so I came to where I am now in my home office and I sat down and I started thinking about it. What haven't I done? What can I mark this special occasion with? And eventually I came up with sport. I'd never done sport before. I'd not done a single thing. I was still lifting weights and, doing a little bit of running, a bit of hand cycling just to keep myself healthy, but I'd never done anything competitively. Now, the Invictus Games was 2 years old at this point, and I'd seen a lot of my friends go out there, come back with, hoards full of medals, which is great. But I also saw them massively come out of their shells as individuals. They'd gone from someone who maybe lacked confidence and was a bit unsure to this guy that just blossomed and was confident and, got their old self back, and I kind of saw the power of sport. So I decided to have a go at it. And I didn't really want to just, dip my toe in the water and contact the local club and try something. I thought I'll just go for this Invictus Games thing, what everyone's doing, and see how I get on. So I applied, was fortunate enough to make the team, turned up there for the first day of training, and very much like the first day I learned to walk, thought I could get by on brute force and ignorance. And after 4 minutes of going max chat on a Concept 2 rower, realised that wasn't the case. And I was going to have to knuckle down and train very, very hard if I wanted to be successful in it. And so that's what I did. That from that moment on, I think it was 2017, I just knuckled down, and that was my focus for that first year. Getting up at 5 a.m, going onto my handbike in the garage, knocking out the cardio, then doing the strength and conditioning in the evening, traveling around the country for sports-specific training on the weekends, and just trying to, I only ever wanted to do it once. That was the thing. So I thought I'm going to go all out once, hopefully come back with a load of gold medals, and then just knock it on the head and do something different. So that was the approach I took. I just hammered myself constantly throughout all the training to do as good as I could.
And you did pretty well.
Yeah, it didn't quite go to plan the first year. I came back with 2 silvers and 2 bronzes, and was a little disappointed. And although I probably could have just said, you know what, I've experienced it, I've done okay, I've medaled, so I'll be happy with that. I just couldn't do it. I just thought to myself, it's never going to look right when you've got 2 silvers and 2 bronzes without any gold medals. It's just going to look stupid. So I decided that the following year, I was going to do it again. And if I was lucky enough to be selected, I was going to approach it differently this time and be smart.
Yeah.
And actually listen to what my coaches told me rather than just try and hammer myself and just get as fit as I could. And I went back in 2018 and I managed it. I managed to come back with 4 golds that time, 1 silver and 2 bronzes. So, a successful chapter.
Mate, that is awesome. I mean, obviously, you became friends with Prince Harry in the process. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, he's a huge, obviously it's his baby, but a huge supporter of the games, huge supporter of, the lads and the girls, and just a genuinely really nice guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like even when the cameras are off, there's no audio recording, and you're in a private setting, just a genuinely good person.
Mate, yeah, that's the impression I get. I like him from a distance. You've done all sorts of stuff. You've done some crazy stuff. I tell you, I do want to tell people that Mark Ormrod does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and takes it to another level, obviously, because he's a triple amputee. There's a guy out there, you train with Sam Sheriff, don't you?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Who's a bootneck PTI, another awesome bloke. But you get amongst that. What is it about the BJJ that you love?
What it is, mate, before I was injured, from about the age of 12, I competed competitively as a full contact kickboxer, Muay Thai, and then I boxed in the core as a heavyweight. Yeah. And after I was injured, I had several people approach me from, I think it was karate was one of them, and maybe like Aikido or Judo, the second one, and asked me if I wanted to train with them. And they told me they could get me a black belt in their discipline. Now, I knew from my experience in martial arts that wasn't possible. And if it was going to be based on sympathy and pity. Yeah. And then one day I was in the mess at Stonehouse and I met Sam for the first time. And he said, do you want to come down and train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with me? I'm the chief unarmed combat instructor. I'm a purple belt. Do you want to come down and give it a go? Now, I trained Jiu-Jitsu when I was younger, but I didn't know the difference between traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But because he was a bootneck, I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. show him that I'm not going to be able to do anything, and then we'll just knock it on the head. And I went down there, and I understood then that it was ground fighting. I didn't have to stand up, I didn't have to kick, didn't have to punch, do any of that stuff that I couldn't do with just one arm. And we had what we call a row. And obviously he didn't go full out on me, and he just was, he was learning as I was learning. But when I finished that first session, I thought I can actually progress in this martial arts based on hard work and discipline and effort, not people feeling sorry for me and just handing out different color belts. And that was it, mate. From then on, I was like, right, this is my new thing. You know, I love this sport. You know, I love the community of it as well. It's the closest thing I've found to life in the military, that camaraderie and that brotherhood with the jiu-jitsu community. And it's just great. It just, you know, on the mats, off the mats, the lifestyle, you know, I just love it. It's brilliant.
I mean, just so people are aware, I follow Mark on social media and that, and literally every now and again there'll be a photograph of him working his absolute nuts off on the mats. And I mean, properly putting everything into it, and it's awesome. It's mega inspiring, and it's brilliant. Mate. I'm glad you're loving it.
You have to come down one day, mate.
I'll come down. Yeah, do you know what? I did used to do it, not at any competitive level. I used to sort of like tap into it because a friend of mine asked me to go and train with him because he was getting a one-to-one, and they basically needed the guinea pig to come in and get twist up into all sorts of shapes and sizes. But you know what? It was awesome. It's probably the most addictive thing I've ever gotten into, but never continued on because I'm always making excuses. So who knows, mate? Who knows?
But do you know what as well, mate? What I think is really good about it, you know, and maybe people wouldn't immediately think this, but in terms of mental health as well, you know, I just found that the way, like, I mean, first of all, when someone's trying to choke you or make you tap, there's nothing else you can think about. All your problems, you're not paying the mortgage, they become irrelevant because all you're thinking about is surviving and not getting choked out. But then when you get through that initial 6-month frustration period of, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and it just doesn't make any sense, and you start to understand it, it then becomes like a game of human chess. And then you see your own growth and progression. And that's very positive on your mental health because you feel like you're moving forward, you're growing, you're making progress. Yeah. You know, and that's been a big thing for me, you know, a big part of it for me as well as the positive effects on mental health.
I always likened it. You know, I wasn't too sure about it when I first got asked to go along because like you, I was actually into Muay Thai. And I was training with that. And then someone said about this other thing. And I was like, I don't fancy doing this rolling around lark. And then sort of went along. And it's like a game of chess, isn't it? You sort of like, you do have to think a long way in advance about what you're going to be doing in a few other. It is really addictive. And I'm, you know, I didn't continue it because of work and what have you. But it's something that I keep wanting to make time for.
We'll get you down, mate.
We'll come down. Sam will be able to twist me up. Yeah, there you go. Mate, you've done some pretty scary things actually since all of what we've spoken about. You've done a lot of daredevil stuff. I'm intrigued to know what's the scariest, or what are you scared of, if anything?
Oh God, getting old. Getting old, scary. No, on a serious note, because I use my legs full time and I don't use a wheelchair. I'm not stupid enough to not understand that as I get older and my body gets weaker, there's going to come that point where I'm going to have to be sensible and say, listen, you need to use a wheelchair, and your mobility is going to be reduced. So that is a concern of mine, you know. But in terms of all those other, you know, the bungee jumping, wing walking, skydiving, all that kind of stuff, you know, mate, I mean, I don't find them scary. They're thrilling. The only one time that I found one of them scary was the bungee jump. Obviously, I don't get tied on by my ankles. I get tied on with a chest harness. But as I reached the peak of the rope stretching, my left leg nearly fell off, and I was above a lake. Right, and these things, these things are 20 grand a piece, and I was above a lake, so I had to reach up and grab the socket and stop my leg hurtling 100 feet towards the lake beneath me and lose it, and end up having to get a scuba team in there to recover 100, my prosthetics. So,
mate, I didn't know that about that story. That's fucking brilliant. We're going to sort of like move it on a little bit. You haven't done this all on your own. And I know what you're going to say, but who have you got to thank for being with you along that journey that we've just spoken about for the last 40 odd minutes?
Yeah, you do know what I'm going to say, mate, but it's got to be my wife, Becky.
Yeah.
When we met, she was 21. She was in Plymouth. She just finished a 4-year degree. She just earned a degree. We'd been together for 12 months, and then this happened. So, and her parents live up in Surrey, up in Addlestone. So there was nothing really keeping her in Plymouth. She had her whole life ahead of her. But for whatever reason, she decided that she was going to stick around, and that together we could overcome it and build a life together. And that's what we did. We just celebrated this weekend on the 2nd of May, our 11-year wedding anniversary. Been awesome. Together for 14 years, 2 kids together, just rocking life daily. She's there all the time throughout everything, mate.
I knew what you were going to say. I just wanted you to say it because it was an important part of your. No, I think it's an important part of your story that you two are able to do that. It's it's good. Now, again, people will be surprised after hearing all that Mark does motivational speaking. So I'd just like to throw that out there because you've heard it there, but there's more to it. What do you talk about when you do your motivational talks?
You know what? 95% of the time, I tell that story what I've just told, but in a lot more detail over a prolonged period of time with a very gory PowerPoint presentation. I got photographs of myself getting operated on in Afghanistan on the table in a tent. So I throw all that in. But, each time it's a little bit different, but the majority of it is about perspective, because a lot of the times you go into these corporates and maybe a business is facing a financial challenge and, everyone's getting stressed out and they lose perspective. And then this guy walks in with 3 limbs missing, shows you how he got blown up and how he recovered and who helped him recover. And all of a sudden, the financial issues that they're facing seem very manageable and easy to overcome, And then there's mindset. I delve into a bit of, particularly in the Q&A section, my mindset going through rehab and now and, how it was shaped and how I continue to try and improve it. All sorts of different things, really.
Yeah. If anyone wants to listen to him, get him down to your business, or even through webinars as the crisis that we're in the middle of would dictate. Mate, moving on, because it is the Talisker Wild Tales podcast, we need to definitely talk about the outdoors and how important is that to you, both physically and mentally.
All right, do you know what, as I've gotten older, I think it's become more important. One of the things I really love about Becky, my wife, is that she loves the outdoors as well. And yesterday's a perfect example. I can't always go on the walks through the forest or through the muddy puddles and running through the lakes and everything with the kids because of X, Y, and Z reasons. But she does that because we both understand how important it is to be out in nature and to leave the devices behind, to switch off the TV and to get out there and just reconnect and purge your brain. But since this lockdown, I've took my hand bike off of the turbo trainer, and we've all been out exploring the whole of Plymouth, and I love it because normally I'm either driving past somewhere and you don't get time to take anything in, or if I'm walking, 95% of my concentration is on staying upright, so I don't take in a lot of stuff around me. But on my bike, I'm down low, I'm stable. It's not that much of a hangout. I enjoy all the scenery around me. I find it very relaxing and therapeutic.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and it is what this is all about as well. This chat, it's about the outdoors and what it means to people. I've got to tell a story quickly here before we do move on to the final bits. I think it was the first time I met Mark, and it was at a charity event, all to do with raising money for the Royal Marines charity, or whatever it was called back in the day, because it's been a few different things.
Yeah.
And myself and Jamie Sanderson, who's obviously the other guy from Rock to Recovery, the main guy, I should say, from Rock to Recovery, we'd arranged to meet you. Now, you knew Jamie, but I'd never met you before, outside the Tower Hotel. I think, am I right in this, thinking this is the first time? I think it was.
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, and this obviously, Mark's turned up in his car and he's parked it right outside the front of the Tower Hotel in London, in the disabled spot. Obviously, there's one disabled spot outside. And as he's getting out, the guy that, obviously one of the security guys from the hotel, comes storming over because he's just seen this young guy, this young man, get out of a car and go to walk away from it. And you can hear him saying, "Oi, oi, oh, you can't park there. It's a disabled space." And then he's obviously walked around the corner, and you're stood in front of him, obviously two pathetic legs and your arm attached as well. And his face was a picture. I mean, I wish I could have taken a picture. And you just looked at him as if to say, "What's the problem, mate?"
Mate,
and he scurried away.
I get it all the time, mate. Still now, even, and I don't know what car I was driving that day. Probably if I was in London, it would have been the family car. But right now, I enjoy cars and all that kind of stuff. I've got a Nissan GTR on the driver right now. So you imagine when that pulls up in a disabled spot with a relatively youngish looking person in it. It's non-stop abuse, man. I've had notes left on my windscreen. I've had people taking pictures of me sat in my car, all sorts of stuff. It's crazy.
What? And they still can't see from this photographic evidence?
Well, normally, you pull up and all they can see is your chest up, isn't it?
Yeah.
It takes me a little bit of time to get out of the car, so it's not like I can just hop straight out. But usually by the time I get out, they're gone. But yeah, they'll take pictures.
It's not like you can hop straight out and return fire.
Yeah, I wish.
Right, mate, we're going to start wrapping up now. I'm going to ask you one last question from me for everyone listening, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to go on to one question sent in by people, because I put it out there saying, what would you like to know from, what question would you like to ask Mark? And then the person, whoever I read out, that person gets a bottle of Talisker. But mate, before we ask that question, what advice have you got for people during this crisis on how to stay positive?
I think we touched on it in the beginning. Is look for the positives in it. Now, I find that hard to say because there's been a lot of people that have unfortunately died during this crisis, and so people may be related or who know those people would find it very difficult to find something positive in it. But for the rest of us, we're locked in a house, right? Temporarily, we've got Wi-Fi, heat, electricity. All the creature comforts you ever want in life. I've never spent so much time with my family ever, so that's a massive positive for me. I'm like you, Foxy. I'm busy, most of the time bouncing all over the place. It's given me an opportunity now to catch up and catch my breath and to get on top of things. So I'm just trying to look for the positives in this situation and to capitalize on them. But also, again, what we said earlier was habits and routines. Don't just roll out of bed at any time of the day with no plan about what you're going to do for that day. Yeah. And, put exercise as an afterthought. Have a structured daily routine that you stick to give you that consistency, and that's the key. I can't explain how powerful it is to have that consistent routine.
Yeah, definitely. And you've obviously had a routine from, long before the injury, but again, routine probably was a big part of recovering as well, wasn't it?
Massively.
Right, mate. I'm going to move on to the question now. We've covered an awful lot there, and it's been quite, in a very good way, quite deep, and we've explored an awful lot. And we have covered a lot, and there's been some stuff that I'll take away from this for sure, definitely, most of it, because I mean that is an inspiring chat, and I've really, really, really enjoyed it, mate. There's stuff there that I didn't know, and so I'm really pleased that we've had this conversation. But mate, I'm going to go a little bit deeper now, and the person that asked this is Dan McKenna 1991 on Insta, and the question is, Mark, you've won 11 medals at the Invictus Games, but what sauce do you prefer on your bacon butties, brown or red?
Obviously red. Who puts brown sauce on their bacon butties?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
What?
But I mean, that was a question that I figured he deserved a little bit of airtime there, because I wanted it to go a bit light. I wanted it light.
Fair one. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I wanted it light and red, not light and brown.
Yeah.
Mate, that was awesome. You're a legend, and I really appreciate you coming on. And mate, let's catch up again soon.
Yeah, when this is all over, mate, I'll get myself back up to London, and we'll do that, and then we'll get you down on the mats, like we said.
Yeah, exactly.
Do a bit of training.
Yeah, twist me up.
That's
Tie me in knots. All right, mate.
Brilliant. Mate. Thank you, mate. I appreciate you inviting me on, mate. It's been great.
Thanks very much to Mark. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and follow me and the Book of Man for the latest news. Thanks again to Talisker for supporting this podcast, and thanks for listening. Cheers. See you in a bit.